Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. Here we are, another Wednesday where I'm going to give you hopefully some strategies that you can use to live the life you've always wanted. That's my goal every Wednesday. So glad you're with me. Want to remind everybody, if you're on the Live Well coaching platform, whether you're using the website or the app, I want you to continue to lean into that. We're building more and more content, so stay tuned as we just continue to add content to that program and give you what we hope is practical information. That really is the feedback that you can give us. That's what you can give me on this day today. Like as we go through our topic for today, what I want to make sure is that what we're providing is information that feels relevant, to your life. So just keep giving us feedback. You can just comment on this video. You can go on the Live Well Coaching website or app and just comment on there, because we're looking to make sure that we're meeting your felt needs. So thanks for being here. I got a pretty interesting topic today. I'm going to tease you a little bit before I tell you what we're actually talking about. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples. I want to tell you about some folks that I think you'll be familiar with. Start with one of the guys that, as I look through, especially recent history, he's one of the most dynamic guys that has changed in many ways the way we live, and it's Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs was, involved really early as a founder at Apple and got fired, I think, basically, and came back to Apple to create some of the most amazing pieces of technology that we've had. I think about this little dude right here. My iPhone is pretty awesome, and I'm attached to it. I wish I wasn't as attached to it as I am, and I think about kind of what Steve did, and it was groundbreaking. It was revolutionary. It was just something that changed the world. Right? Everything he did with Apple. But I think you guys know where I'm going with this. If you know anything about Steve Jobs, the word on the street is there were moments where Steve Jobs was not a great human, right? Did amazing things, awesome things. But when it got down to what it was like to live and work with the guy, I think it was hard, right? So he had a daughter. Her name was Lisa Brennan Jobs, and she wrote a book, and some of the stuff in the book is just hard. It's hard to read. Small Fry is the name of the book, and she describes how Steve Jobs, this amazing guy with all this talent, would sometimes just belittle her. A lot of times he would deny paternity, like, I'm not even your dad, get mad and say things that were just crazy like that. So he's one of the most successful guys in the world, yet his behavior, even with the people that were closest to him, was really difficult. If I had to summarize what I think his daughter has said, is he valued control and image over genuine connection. He valued control and image over genuine connection. All right, so we got Steve Jobs. I'm just going to let's put a pin in that. All right, I'll tell you about somebody else. How many of you have ever heard of Kanye West? I know you have. That dude is, again, if you think about his contribution to music and creativity, I don't care what you think about Kanye or rap music in general, or the dude has been an influencer, and he has an incredible way of motivating people and inspiring people. People are just kind of attracted to whatever that intangible is in him, and he's done great things. But there's another side to the story, right? And we've all seen it play out in the media. I remember, it was the MTV Awards years ago, like 2009 or 2010, something like that. And Taylor Swift wins the award. And what does Kanye do? He like jumps up on stage and kind of assigns value, I guess, to Beyonce or something like, everybody knows Beyonce should have gotten this award. It was just this weird interaction, really, really self-centered, self-focused. And he's known for that. He's known for just these headlines where he prioritizes what? His own narrative. He prioritizes control. Wrote down some of the statements that he's made. They're sort of funny. Like he consistently calls himself a genius. He compares himself to figures like Shakespeare, God. pretty high position that Kanye is assuming there. And I think we can all agree, if we want to summarize it, grandiosity. There's one thing that I think you can say Kanye definitely possesses. It's this grandiose view of himself that, he's way up here and everybody else is way down there. All right, so we got Steve Jobs, we got Kanye. Let's put a pin in there. Somebody that's a little bit maybe more surprising. Let's talk about Lance Armstrong. Now, Lance Armstrong, if you look at athletes, has been one of the most successful athletes that has ever existed. Like, he's one of the best. Won the Tour de France. I thought I wrote it down. I didn't. Many times. It had never been done before. And he built his brand, like his entire brand, on the idea of integrity, grit, determination, character. Like that's what cycling really is, isn't it? Like if you're a professional football player, and there's a lot of accolades, and there's the roar of the crowd. If you're a basketball player, there's some pro basketball players that they're just born with talent, just born with it, right? And so they can be flashy, and there's again that idea that I'm playing in front of thousands of people, and what that means to me. Lance Armstrong is like the opposite. His narrative was, I work harder. I think his brand was called Live Strong, right? And I remember when that was big, Live Strong. They had those yellow rubber bracelets. You remember that? And man, he built an empire around his ability to have just more grit than anybody else. Yeah, I'm awesome at cycling, but I'm not awesome because I was born this way. I'm awesome because I've got the ability to live strong. I've got the ability to do it, to live harder. I've got the ability to kind of lean into challenges with my integrity and my character. And when other people quit, I don't. And when other people are fake, I'm not. Like that was his whole brand, right? What happened when he was confronted for doping? At some point it came out. Lance Armstrong used performance-enhancing drugs. Did he demonstrate character and integrity in those moments? Go back and read some of the articles. It was the opposite. It's wild now to look back. Rather than sitting down and say, okay, guys, look, here's what happened, and here's the process, and here's what I went through. Man, he went nuclear on people that were trying to tell the truth, on the whistleblowers. And honestly, the only way that he ever stopped this manipulation and lying, I mean, he would look at cameras and say, I didn't dope. Straight-faced. I mean, the dude is like, he was a talented liar. Only reason he did it is because the evidence mounted so heavily, he couldn't deny it any longer. There's just it was inconsistent with reality. So you have Lance Armstrong, who's this incredible manipulator, looking straight at cameras, lying. You've got Kanye, who's super grandiose, doesn't even line up with reality with the way he talks about himself most of the time. You've got Steve Jobs, that is the guy that again, change the world, yet more concerned about like control and about image, like what he presented to the world, than he was about goodness or grace. What do these guys have in common? Some of you are way ahead of me, right? I'm describing different forms of narcissism. These three guys, I'm not diagnosing them as narcissistic personality disorder. I could never do that because I've never seen them clinically. What I'm saying is they have some traits of narcissism. And there are some of you that are dealing with people right now that you're convinced they're a narcissist. And I think we all know people that we look at and we're like, I'm not so sure about this person. And if it's a colleague or someone at work that's more distant, you're like, I think maybe there's some narcissistic characteristics there. Some of you are married to these people. Some of you, they're family members. Some of you, they're part of your family of origin. You grew up with them. So some of you are dating a narcissist right now. Some of you, they're the closest people to you. And the stories I'm telling you about control and about image, like presenting a certain image, or just these grandiose thoughts, I'm up here, everybody else is down here, and especially the manipulation, you feel like that's the life you live. And if that's you, this Wellness Wednesday is for you, because we're going to talk about how to identify narcissism, what it is, what the difference between narcissism is and just self-centeredness, because we're all pretty much self-centered, by the way, right, at certain points. And what's the difference between, those kinds of traits and narcissistic personality disorder? That's a huge jump, right? We're also going to talk about, what do you do if you find yourself in a relationship with a narcissist, and how do you manage that relationship in such a way that it doesn't impact you, or at least you minimize the impact that it has. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I'll start with just looking at the difference between narcissism versus self-centeredness versus narcissistic personality disorder. So we'll start with self-centeredness. Look, we're all there. I'm self-centered all the time. So are you. Do you know how I know that? You're human. Like, that's just part of being a human. There's moments where, we kind of get caught in our needs, what I want, what I think. And so self-centered people are inconsiderate. They can show empathy. And I think that's a big point that you need to recognize and understand. If you're self-centered or having a self-centered moment, you can still have the ability to see someone else's plight, to walk in their shoes. You have the ability at certain points to prioritize others. And these are just questions that you need to ask yourself. Am I consistently self-centered? Am I self-centered just in certain moments when I get stressed out or overwhelmed? Or am I self-centered when I've been pleasing other people for so long that I get to where I can't take it anymore, and so I swing to the total opposite end of the pendulum continuum and focus squarely on my needs? This would be, I'll give you an example. It's like a friend who dominates a conversation. You ever known those people? Sure you have, right? You get in a group and it's like, man, Tom never shuts up. He knows everything. Tom knows everything about everything. He's the expert on everything. Right? We know these people. Some of you are those people. Like that's something that you deal with, is you struggle to kind of like get outside of yourself enough to hear and listen and kind of value other people's perspectives. And so everything I've just described about self-centeredness can be annoying. It can be frustrating. It can be toxic. I think it's fair to say if you're very self-centered, or if you're in a relationship with someone that's very self-centered, it can end up being toxic, feeling toxic. But there's a difference between being self-centered and being narcissistic. And we need to point that out, because I hear this all the time. Go on social media. We talk about it all the time. You're a narcissist. That person's a narcissist. Most of the time, those people are just self-centered. Narcissism is different in that a true narcissist is going to have a persistent need for admiration. Like, a narcissist is going to need people across situations, across context, across environments. They're going to need people to constantly admire them. They're going to lack genuine empathy. That's huge. Because if someone has the capacity for empathy, even if it doesn't come easily, that person by nature, by very definition, isn't a narcissist. One of the definitions of a narcissistic person, or a person with narcissistic traits, is that they don't have the capacity to walk in other people's shoes. They don't get it. They don't get other people. When you're interacting with them, the reason they can just say and do the crap that they say and do is because they don't have the capacity to understand where you're coming from. Typically, narcissists will manipulate in order to control. There's lots of people that are self-centered, but they don't manipulate in order to control. Like, that self-centered, it's just more, it's more central to just how they see the world and how they see themselves, but they're not maliciously trying to control everything around them, and especially control rejection and how people see them and things like that. Another piece of a true narcissist is going to be a sense of entitlement. Now, we all have a sense of entitlement, but narcissists have they're talented. They're good at this, and they can be in situations, and what they expect from other people is going to go way above and beyond what other people expect. They're going to expect that people cater to them, take care of them, understand them, have tons of empathy for them. Like, that's the irony of it. You ever met somebody like that? Have zero empathy for someone else, but they're so entitled in the way that they feel other people should have empathy for them and understand them and see them. So I just described the qualities of narcissism, but you got to be super careful, guys, because a lot of people have narcissistic traits, but they're not narcissistic personality disorders. Does that make sense? A narcissistic personality disorder, that's what's in the DSM, the diagnostic book. And there's tons of people walking around that have been labeled, that's a narcissist. And what we think of that as like, they've got narcissistic personality disorder, and that's not the case. That's a very specific set of criteria that you have to meet in order to truly be a narcissistic personality disorder. So the reason I'm saying that is because in some ways you need to normalize this. You need to normalize that people are going to be self-centered, probably all of us. You need to normalize that there's a lot of people that are going to be narcissistic, have narcissistic traits, but there's very, very few people that are actually narcissists. Make sense? So what does it mean to be a narcissist? Well, I'm not going to go over all the criteria. I at some point, maybe in the future, we can circle back on this and go through over the diagnostic criteria of narcissistic personality disorder. But at the end of the day, the symptoms of narcissism that we've already talked about will be so entrenched and so much a part of their personality that it literally disrupts their ability to function as a husband, as a wife, as a professional, as an employee, as a mother or a father. Like, they cannot fulfill the roles that they have to fulfill in order to function in their everyday life. So when you define it like that, you can see most people are not going to fit in that criteria. Most people are either going to be self-centered or have narcissistic traits. Now, look, I'm not saying it's easy to deal with, and I know that, and that's why I'm doing this, because I know it can be super hard to deal with these people, but I at least wanted to kind of get out like the idea that this is a continuum, And more than likely, you're on the continuum at certain points in your life. And right now, we just want to talk about how do we respond to this? How do we respond to people that are struggling with self-centeredness, or people that have gone a step further and they've kind of engaged this lifestyle of narcissistic traits, and especially people that meet the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. What do we do? Let's talk about how these people present challenges to us in different environments. One of the, I don't know, maybe most benign ways that we can encounter a narcissistic person or someone who's very self-centered is in a work situation. And I would say that, if you work in a decent sized office, there's got to be some people there that are struggling with narcissism to some degree or another. Just play the numbers, play the odds, right? You're in a group of 10 and there's 10 people on your team. There's going to be a person or two that are narcissists, right? Like they have those traits. Definitely going to be some people that under stress get super self-centered. How does that look? Well, I mean, a lot of times they're going to take credit for your work. They're going to avoid accountability. They're going to blame everybody. If something goes wrong, it's going to be your fault. If everything goes right, it's mine. Hey, I'm awesome. You ever met that guy on your team? That's tough. They gaslight people a lot. I've never heard that word gaslight until, I don't know, like 2 years ago. But we're using it a lot in my field now, and I hear it a lot on social media. Gaslight means that you just make other people feel like they're crazy. Like, so this is reality, and if you're gaslighting someone, you're going to say things that are just inconsistent with reality, but you're going to say them like they're true. And we all experience that from people. And if you have someone on your team at work that does that, it can be really hard, very, very difficult. Here's how it impacts things. And this might be a clue for you if you're struggling with narcissistic influence or a narcissistic culture at your workplace. High turnover. So if you have a workplace that people just can't stay, that's a good sign there's some narcissism. Is the work environment toxic? Like, are there moments where it just feels like this is not healthy? I can't put my finger on it, but it's not healthy. It's likely that there's some narcissistic traits that are becoming normalized, and it's part of the culture on your team. It's something that absolutely has to be addressed. So if you're in that situation at work, what can you do? Like, how do you deal with people that are being narcissists on your team? I know this sounds crazy, but one of the things that you can start to do is just take some notes. Like, if you feel like this is happening more than it should be, and you feel like, man, we do have this sort of toxic workplace and people are leaving, just get a note out in your phone, find a journal that you can keep safe, and just start writing some notes down. Take inventory of when people are displaying some of those narcissistic tendencies. Is the grandiosity there? Is there a lot of blame going on? Are people manipulating? Are they gaslighting it? And if you can just get some stuff down on paper, what that does is it helps you begin to look at it objectively. And you might do that and look at it at the end of the month and say, you know what? Yes, John or Susie, that they've got some narcissistic tendencies, but that's really not responsible for the toxicity in our workplace. Or you might look at it and say, man, I can draw some lines directly from what I'm seeing in my workplace and a narcissistic person or a narcissistic culture. And if that's the case, you do want to begin to try to address that. Sometimes it's hard to do that. If you're in leadership, man, you better address it, right? If you're finding this as a leader and you follow through with this homework, man, don't let that go unchecked. It's got to be addressed. And I don't care who it ticks off, and I don't care what, pot you stir. It's incumbent upon you as the leader to take responsibility to intervene and make sure that that workplace is a safe space for people to operate. But if you're not a leader, then it really comes down to boundaries. Like, how do you set personal boundaries that allow you to say, okay, I'm not going to give the narcissistic tendencies or the narcissistic culture or the narcissistic person access to my heart or to my work in a way that seems inappropriate. So it's really just boundary work. And one of the biggest boundaries you need to draw is you can't take it personally. If you take some data points, you write some stuff down, and you identify a person or two that you would say, man, this person's pretty narcissistic. They've got some traits. You've got to start with recognizing that's not about you, and you're not going to change them. It's very unlikely that you change a narcissist on your team. Like, you don't have that kind of relationship with them, correct? So that being the case, your first battle becomes the battleground of your mind, and you just can't be activated by it. Self-centered people, narcissists, are going to do what they do. Your job is to say, I'm not going to give that access to my heart. Offense is inevitable. Being offended is a choice, right? How many times have you heard that? Well, that's true. It's actually true. So the battleground of your mind is to say, okay, I expect people to act in ways that are consistent with their character. I expect narcissists to manipulate and control. And my first job is to not make it about me. I don't need them to treat me in a certain way. I don't need them to stop being that way in order for me to feel stable. People can be who they're going to be, but I have boundaries, and I set limits, and I just don't allow myself to get pulled in to needing the fix to happen in this person's life in order for me to feel okay at work. Right? Now, if someone's being self-centered or taking responsibility for the team's success or blaming other people instead of taking responsibility for a failure, I think appropriate boundaries work there, right? And sometimes that's uncomfortable, but I think you might need to be the person that says, hey, I think we need to try to create the culture where we don't blame. So I'm happy to have this conversation, but I want to have it in a positive way where we're not blaming everybody for the failure. Let's draw some lines in the sand, and let's talk about what we do next. That's a boundary. You can own that. That's it. The narcissist doesn't have to agree with you. They don't have to affirm you. They don't have to stop gaslighting. But that doesn't keep you from setting limits about the conversations you're willing to have or not have. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. If you want more information about this, gotta read John Townsend, Henry Cloud, Boundaries, if you haven't read that. Incredible. There's also a book that they both wrote, I think, called Safe People. Really, really good, because it'll give you strategies to think about drawing boundaries with people on your team and at work. All right, so that's just a little bit of a tidbit of what you can do with folks on your team, whether they work for you or you work with them or they're your boss, right? Now, what do you do and how do you recognize a narcissist in a romantic relationship? And this is where it can be most toxic, honestly, guys. It's a lot easier to draw boundaries with, some dude on your team at work, or even your boss. It's a lot harder and more exhausting to draw boundaries and to manage narcissistic behaviors in a romantic relationship. So the crazy part about narcissist and romantic relationships is it usually starts really, really good. I know that might surprise you, but man, narcissists, when they want to, man, they can pour on the charm. And some of you have been caught in this web before. So these would be the people that, man, they go over the top when you're dating. The first date was, he took me to courtside seats at the Magic game, and then we flew in a helicopter to the beach and drank wine. And as we looked at the stars, I mean, that sort of like over the top gesture. They make big events out of everything. We call it love bombing now. I don't know how I feel about that word, but it sort of illustrates it. It's like, I'm going to just blow you up with how awesome you are. Now think about that. That makes sense, right? If you're a narcissist and you believe you're up here and everybody else is down here, you're going to connect with someone that in your mind you believe is amazing, right? Who else would deserve your attention as a narcissist? And so when you believe that, then man, you're gonna pour it on. You're gonna pour on the charm. It's gonna be over the top. But the problem is, as the relationship progresses, that love bombing morphs into control. And some of you have watched this happen in romantic relationships. It's really hard, very sad. Some of the stories I've heard in therapy where you're like, man, you talk about a bait and switch. I thought I was marrying this woman that was going to worship the ground I walked on, but she has turned into a tyrant. I thought I was marrying this guy that was going to cherish me, treat me like a princess, and man, he is vile. He wants to control every aspect of who I am and what we do. There's a reason for this, and the reason is narcissists actually have a narcissistic injury. And what that means is usually early on in life, they never had anyone tell them that they're awesome. That's the irony of all this. Most little kids that grow up in healthy environments at some point stand in the middle of the room and they're surrounded by, their parents and aunts and uncles or friends. And man, those parents, they are speaking life into that little kid. Like, look at how cute you are. They're dying laughing on the floor because you're so funny, right? And you're saying something or doing a little monologue as a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old. And man, you feel like, man, these people love me. Like these people are invested in me. Like, that's part of being a healthy little kid, right? Is getting that sense of affirmation and love and acceptance. Like, you're enough. You're amazing. I tell you, for me as a parent, man, I've tried so hard to just infuse my kids with the idea that there's value, that God has a plan for their life, that all the combinations of DNA that God could have chosen when he created them, he chose them. That's the stuff that I try to sort of speak into my kid. I know you do too. But see, narcissists, they never got that. Why? Because their parents were either super stressed out, dealing with their own mental health problems, dealing with their own addiction issues. Who knows, man? Why? But at this point, it doesn't really matter because they left their family feeling this deep sense that I'm not enough. And they never had anyone communicate to them, you're valuable. So what do? They spend the rest of their life deeply desiring to feel like they're important and like they're smart and like they're capable and they've got something to prove. So doesn't it make sense that when you would start a romantic relationship with a narcissist, that you would feel like $1 million? This person's amazing. But as you get into it and you deal with the inevitable issues connected to being in a relationship, right? You failed your narcissist. You disappointed them. You didn't agree with them. Something happened. That's called being human. And their response to that was they felt deeply threatened. And in that moment, because of the interaction with you, because of whatever happened, that little disappointment that the majority of people just blip on the radar screen, let's keep going, grace and forgiveness, that injured them. And now they're going to spend a lot of their time trying to control, trying to manipulate. They've got to gain leverage, right? Because they feel like they're not enough. It's so counterintuitive. I know. It feels crazy because you're like, wait, no, you don't understand, Mike. These people they're super arrogant. Like, they think they're amazing. They don't think they're less than and not enough. Exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. They feel less than, not enough. Here's a great example. Do you know that the overwhelming majority of people that are involved in domestic violence, this could be men or women, most likely it's men that are physical with women. Not always the case. Doesn't matter. The aggressor of someone that's involved in domestic violence, when you strike your wife or when you hit your husband, you are not feeling powerful. Are you aware of that? What do you say when you talk to the domestic violence person that has perpetrated? They always sit there and say, I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. She made me do. I felt like I didn't have any choice. You see what I'm saying? They feel like they don't have any choice. They feel like they're way down here, small, insignificant. And that's why they lash out. You see the metaphor there? Your narcissist is controlling and manipulating, lashing out, criticizing, not out of arrogance, but out of this deep, deep insecurity. So what do you do in that situation? Well, number one, you've got to get people involved, and that's going to rub the narcissist the wrong way, because the minute you get people involved in this, you're going to activate their feelings of being less than and not enough. And then when you activate those feelings of being less than and not enough, then, they're going to honestly just react out of more narcissism. But you can't let that stop you. You can't keep the secrets. You've got to shine light on dark places, and part of that is you just reaching out. And you need to find people. Now, you don't need to find unhealthy people, and you don't need to find people that are just available. I'm going to talk to my neighbor because they're there and they come over on weeknights. No, that's a bad idea. You've got to find safe people. You've got to find people that'll be healthy. You've got to find people that will begin to speak life into you. You got to find people that won't make you be reactive. You need people that help you be proactive, right? So find safe people, but you need to sort of start building a support network. Number two, you got to recognize the patterns of manipulation, because a lot of time what happens is this gets so disorienting because it seems like this happens to you, right? Like all the gaslighting, all the manipulation, all the control, all the criticism, it just starts to happen to you and you're reeling. So it really, really helps to kind of step back and allow yourself to say, okay, let me first recognize the patterns. And if you can see some of this playing out, then you're armed with that ammunition. Now you might have a chance, right, of drawing different boundaries, anticipating when, this romantic partner is kind of moving into these narcissistic traits, and then what you can do in response to that. And so just like in the workplace, the response is boundaries. I mean, that is absolutely your only option. You've got to draw healthy boundaries. And sometimes those boundaries need to be very physical. Like sometimes you need distance. Sometimes the only chance that a narcissistic person has to enact change is to be very, very uncomfortable. And so when you enact that physical distance, like, hey, I'm not living here with someone who acts like this, who treats me like this. I'm not, maybe you don't have to say I'm going to divorce you, but I'm gone for 3 months and you need to get yourself straight. Like that kind of physical distance, that's a huge boundary, right? But you need to trust that sometimes it's necessary. Even if it's not that extreme, maybe the boundary is I'm not having these kinds of conversations. And once you write some things down and get the patterns down and understand when it happens and why it happens, now you're able to sort of be proactive and not reactive. Okay, I know I anticipate this. I know when this is coming and I have my plan in place. I'm going to be honest with you. The likelihood that you get leverage with someone that's really narcissistic and that you start to see healing take place is not very high. Especially if you don't do it within the context of some sort of therapeutic environment. So that, if you're dealing with someone that's kind of self-centered, you can enact some of the strategies that we've talked about. You can look at boundaries and you can look at recognizing themes and understanding and being proactive about how to set the boundaries out. But if you've got someone that truly has narcissistic traits, you need to be in therapy. It's not going to get better if you just try to do this on your own. Now, if you've got someone that's confirmed narcissistic personality disorder, then yeah, you're going to have to make some shifts and some changes. So, all right. I'm going to do this. I've got a lot more to tell you about narcissism, but we're going to do kind of a pin in it here for today. I'm going to pick it up next week and we'll finish this out. And I'll give you information about sort of what you do to protect yourself in any relationship from a narcissist. But sorry, I went a little long today. I know it's, I get into it. I get excited about it. But if you have questions, we'll post this on some of the social media as well, see if we can get real specific questions about how to deal with narcissism. But in the meantime, do everything you can to just begin to enact some of the strategies that we've talked about already today. And I'll see you back here next time for Wellness Wednesday, 12:15, and we'll finish this up. I promise to give you more strategies for how to deal with the narcissist in your life. All right.